Hey, what's up? I'm Noah. This is Analog Resurgence, and today, in spirit of the holidays, I'm doing a roll review for Santa RAE 1000 black and white film. A little while ago, I received something to the Analog Resurgence P.O. box. This comes from Kevin over in Quebec, here in Canada, and he says, I don't know if you've tested this film before. Anyway, here it is. It is the black and white Santa RAE 1000. This comes from the testing batch they made with a limited number of 1,500 units. Got some of them, pretty sure I will never use them all, so here's one for you for your enjoyment. Thank you, Kevin, because I got a chance to shoot this stuff, and it's a lot of fun. It's also a bit of a mystery as to what exactly this stuff is. Santa RAE 1000 says that it is from Finland with love, and also it's got Santa Claus on it. So I mean, that seems pretty inviting. Based on the information that is on the website for this film, of course, the information for that is in the description below, as well as some links to pick some of this stuff up. It is a 1000 ISO film. It is made in Finland, and also it might be manufactured by Elves. So this specific roll of Santa RAE film that Kevin sent along came from an initial batch in 2019 of 1,500 rolls. And it seems like that initial batch was successful enough that they've continued to produce it. The film is produced in batches, so it's not always available, but you can get information for that on their website to be notified of when there are more rolls. And they produce Santa RAE in 35mm and 120 medium format rolls. So 1000 ISO is a very high ISO, and it's not very common for films to have a box speed of 1000, but seeing a film with a 1000 ISO is probably appealing to a lot of people, especially people coming over from digital who are maybe used to just higher ISOs being much more common when you're shooting on a digital format. The real question though is, what is this stuff? It is tissue paper thin. It is some of the thinnest film I have ever touched or handled, and when I was loading it onto a developing tank to develop it at home, it was a terrifying process. So handling it requires you to be pretty careful, especially if you're developing it yourself. Because of that characteristic, we can maybe assume that the Santa RAE 1000 film is actually being sourced from a company like AGFA, maybe, that is making like specialty technical film. That could maybe be like a film stock that was used for surveillance purposes. But also, their website insists that this is a new film that just is not available anywhere else. Going off of their website, they claim, outside of the powers of the North, this has not been available to humans or the analog community worldwide. So they're playing their cards close to the chest, which is fair. You know, I'm not gonna go digging around, and in the end, it's not super important where this stuff comes from, but it is nice that there is another option out there for black and white. It's also worth wondering whether or not this stuff is like truly a 1000 ISO. All the information on their website says 1000, but I would also maybe recommend just playing around with it and shooting at 800 or just like lower than the box speed of it. Their website again does offer an explanation for this as well. Santa and his troupe have proprietary developing chemicals and machines to develop their own film that are not available to us humans, so the sensitivity with human chemicals is relative to how you develop it. Okay, so it's made by Santa, or made by the Elves and overseen quality control-wise by the big man himself, and it's a new film, so I'm not gonna go digging too deep and picking at this, because I'm not really in a mood to, you know, anger Santa on the 24th of December. So let's take a look at some samples, and I did develop this stuff at home myself. I just used Kodak HD110. These are the results that I got with that. Your results may vary based on your developing times and just, you know, exactly what your workflow is. But here is an idea of what you might get with Santa RAE 1000. And again, as always, all this stuff over on the Patreon. If you're interested, if you're able to, you can support this channel so that I can do more and more of this stuff in the future. 1000 ISO means a high grain for film. It's also like more noise when you're shooting a high ISO in digital. But all things considered, the grain on this stuff isn't terrible. It's kind of in line with what you'd expect from a high ISO film, but there's definitely films that have a much heavier, kind of harsher grain to them. One of the big appeals of a high ISO when shooting, though, is that you can shoot using high shutter speeds or really high apertures for a really big depth of field in pretty normal light. So just kind of walking around with this in the camera, I can shoot really fast and really easily, which is fun. I'm surprised that on some of this stuff, the contrast isn't heavier. I mean, the negatives are really contrasty and there is a lot of contrast to the images, but I'm seeing some pretty great range in the midtones for some of these shots, all things considered, and not losing like a ton of information in the shadows or the highlights. I think that seeing a 1000 ISO does make some people think it means you can get away with shooting it in like really, really low light. But like, you should still be erring on the side of caution and not overestimating its ability. When it's too dark, it's just not going to look that great. Again, maybe shooting this stuff at 800 ISO instead would get you better results here. If we compare it to another high ISO film like Kodak's P3200, we see that P3200 has like a finer grain than Santa Re and a lighter contrast. As I mentioned, P3200 is also a lower ISO film that's just meant to be pushed to 3200. But this stuff is definitely more flexible and kind of easier to work with in comparison to Santa Re. The contrast on Santa Re's stuff does really get punched up here in heavier lighting though, like this. These are some super dramatic shots I got when hanging out with some friends, and I do really like these, but also there's just like not a lot of information in these highlight areas here that I can kind of recover things from. Now originally, especially because this is from an initial batch of the Santa Re 1000 stuff, these rolls only came in 24 exposure lengths. But now you can get them in 36 exposure rolls, so I definitely think that's a big plus in its favor. I definitely think it makes shooting this stuff more worthwhile. And also this stuff is clearly hand rolled, and because of that, you could lose a few frames at the very end of the roll or the very beginning. I would love to know what this stuff is like in medium format, especially because of how thin the film is, and like loading that onto developing reels yourself is a very like slow, very like high stakes process when it's that thin, especially in medium format. It can be a little difficult. So I'm curious to know exactly what that's like, how it is to kind of handle and shoot and like load to develop. But the high contrast of this and like the high ISO as well is probably something that will appeal to a lot of people, and I think is definitely worth a look because it is a more obscure film and I haven't heard a lot of people talking about Santa Re. And because this film is so thin, I believe that it gave me what is called light piping. You can see it around the sprocket holes on the negative of the film once it's been developed. Light has kind of bled out of the image and into these areas where it normally wouldn't. It didn't impact any of my images though, so it's not really something that I'm super worried about. Now, I would love to know if other people are shooting this stuff, if other people have experience with it or any knowledge about the film specifically. Please, let me know. I would also recommend people who are maybe trying it out. If you want less contrast, then shoot it at 800 ISO instead of 1000. But overall, it's an interesting film and it's made by Santa, so, as long as he's abiding labor laws and everything is okay in terms of union for the elves working out there and putting this film together, then it's all good by me. So thank you guys so much for watching, and because this video is going up on December the 24th, for anybody out there who, is celebrating the holidays, Merry Christmas. Happy holidays if it's not Christmas. Information down below for all this stuff, for Pro 8, for Super 8 stuff, for the Patreon, for the Analog Resurgence P.O. Box and stuff. Thank you again, Kevin, for sending this along and giving me something a little festive to talk about today. And as always, I'll see you guys soon. I've got one more video going up next week, just again on New Year's Eve, and that'll be the last video of 2020. And then it'll be a new year. So I'll see you guys next week. Thank you guys so much, and happy holidays.